In the frozen skies over wartime Germany, a single decision made in seconds would echo across nearly half a century. In December 1943, an American bomber limped through enemy airspace, torn apart by flak and fighters, barely holding together. Its crew was wounded, one man already dead, and survival seemed impossible. Then, a German fighter appeared alongside the shattered aircraft. What followed was not an attack, but an act of mercy. Because of that choice, 10 American airmen lived, and for the next 43 years, neither pilot spoke a word about it. The American pilot was Charlie Brown. After that mission, he returned to England on the 20th of December, 1943. His bomber, so badly damaged that ground crews could not believe it had stayed in the air, landed at RAF Feething with 11 wounded men aboard. The aircraft never flew again. During the debriefing, Charlie told his commanding officers what had happened. A German fighter had flown alongside them and escorted them to safety. The reaction was swift and absolute. He was ordered never to mention it again. Not to his crew, not to other pilots. A concern was simple and chilling. If word spread that German pilots could show mercy, it might undermine the psychological framework of total war. The official position was clear humanity, and a German cockpit could not coexist. Charlie obeyed. He finished his combat tour, flew additional missions, and eventually returned home to West Virginia. He went to college, rejoined the Air Force in 1949, and served until 1965. Afterward, he became a Foreign Service officer with the U.S. State Department, traveling to places like Laos and Vietnam. He retired in 1972, settled in Miami, became an inventor, and raised a family. On the surface, life moved forward. But the war never truly released him. His daughter would later remember her father waking suddenly from sleep, drenched in sweat, haunted by memories of combat. Beneath the trauma, beneath the lingering effects of war, one image never faded. A German pilot in a Messerschmitt, BF-109. Flying wingtip to wingtip, looking directly into his eyes. The German pilot, Franz Stigler, carried his own silence after escorting the American bomber away from danger. He landed near Bremen and said nothing to his superiors. In Nazi Germany, what he had done was not bravery. It was a crime. Sparing an enemy aircraft in combat was punishable by execution. Had anyone discovered that he deliberately allowed 10 American airmen to escape, he would have faced a firing squad. So he kept the secret for the remainder of the war. Stigler survived Germany's collapse, the chaos of defeat, and the years of occupation. In 1953, he immigrated to Canada, married, and became a successful businessman. Like Charlie, he built a new life. And like Charlie, he never forgot that day in December 1943. He remembered the bomber's torn fuselage, the gaping holes, the injured crew struggling to keep one another alive, and the young American pilot staring back at him from the cockpit. Later, Stigler would say that something in him changed forever. He lost his appetite for aerial victories. He no longer aggressively pursued kill claims. Seeing that dying crew altered how he understood combat. For decades, both men carried the memory alone. A 10-minute encounter in the sky marked them permanently. Everything changed in 1986 at a combat pilot reunion in Boston, known as the Gathering of the Eagles. Charlie Brown, now 64 years old and a retired Air Force colonel, attended the event at Boeing's invitation to mark the 50th anniversary of the bomber's first flight in 1935. During a conversation, someone asked if he had experienced any particularly memorable missions. During World War II, Charlie paused, then finally told the story. He described the crippled bomber, the German fighter that pulled alongside, the escort through danger, and the final salute. The reaction surprised him. People crowded around, asking questions. Why had he never tried to find that pilot? Who was he? Had he survived the war? Charlie realized that for 43 years, he had lived with that unanswered question. without ever truly pursuing it. In that moment, he decided he had to try. He began through official channels. He contacted the U.S. Air Force, wrote to West German military archives, and requested records from the Army Air Force's historical offices. Somewhere, he believed there had to be documentation of German pilots stationed near Bremen in December 1943. Months passed, then years. Records were missing, destroyed, incomplete, or classified. Germany's military archives had been scattered by division and war. Many Luftwaffe records were lost or captured by the Soviets. Tracking down one pilot from one day in 1943 proved nearly impossible. Still, Charlie could not let go. His nightmares continued. The flak, the fighters, the wounded crew, and always the same question. Who was the German pilot? In 1989, he wrote a detailed account of the incident and submitted it to a newsletter read by American and German combat veterans. He included the date, the location, the circumstances, the markings on the BF-109, every detail he could recall. One detail mattered most. The German pilot had looked directly at him and offered a salute before breaking away. Charlie sent the letter and waited. He was now 67 years old. Nearly 46 years had passed since that mission. The pilot might have died in the war or in the decades since. Still, Charlie had to know. At the same time, in Vancouver, Canada, Franz Stigler was 74. He too had attended Boeing's 1986 anniversary event, the only German pilot present. A local television station interviewed him, and for the first time publicly, he told his story. The bomber he spared, the decision he made, the risk he took. Privately, Stigler had also been searching. He wanted to know if the bomber made it back, if the crew survived. He asked former Luftwaffe comrades and veteran groups, but found no answers. Then, in January 1990, he saw Charlie's letter in the newsletter. The date matched. The location matched. The details matched. After 47 years, Stigler finally knew the crew had survived. He sat down and wrote a letter to Charlie Brown in Miami. It was sent on the 18th of January, 1919. When Charlie opened the envelope from Canada, he found a letter that began with 4 words. I was the one. Their first phone conversation confirmed everything. Stigler described his aircraft in precise detail. Details only the pilot from that day could know. He explained what he had seen when he flew alongside the bomber. The devastation. The wounded men visible through the holes in the fuselage. He remembered the words of his commanding officer, Gustav or Adele, who had once told him that if he ever shot at a man in a parachute, Radel would shoot him himself. To Stigler, the men in that bomber were no different. They were helpless. They posed no threat. Killing them would have been murder, not combat. Stigler explained that he had tried to signal the Americans to land in Germany or divert to neutral Sweden, where they could receive medical care. When they continued toward England, he chose to ward England, escort them through German flak positions to protect them. As they spoke, something profound happened. Charlie's nightmares began to fade. The question that had haunted him for nearly 5 decades finally had an answer. Not just an answer, but a name, a voice, a living person. For Stigler, hearing Charlie meant everything. For 47 years, he had wondered if his choice had mattered. Now he knew it had. All 10 men survived. 6 months later, they met in person in Seattle. Cameras captured the moment. Stigler stepped out of a car, saw Charlie, and ran to embrace him. The 2 former enemies held each other and wept. Stigler looked toward the camera and quietly said, I love you, Charlie. They spent the day talking, filling in the missing decades. Charlie introduced Stigler to members of his crewmen alive because of that single decision. Stigler met their children and grandchildren, entire families that existed because mercy had triumphed over duty. The reunion healed them both. Charlie said his nightmares stopped after finding Stigler. Stigler said that meeting Charlie and the crew was the only truly good thing that came out of World War II for him. He had lost his brother in the war. He had watched the Luftwaffe lose more than 90% of its pilots. He had seen Germany destroyed, but saving those men was something he could live with pride. After 1990, they became inseparable. They spoke weekly by phone and traveled across the United States together, sharing their story at air shows, veteran gatherings, and civic events. On one visit, Stigler gave Charlie a book. Inside, he had written, "In 1940, I lost my only brother as a night fighter. Thanks, Charlie! Your brother Franz! Their families grew close. Their wives became friends. The bond spread outward. Some people never understood. Stigler received angry calls from Germany accusing him of betrayal. Some neighbors in Canada labeled him a Nazi. His response never changed. They could not understand. Labels no longer mattered. German or American, enemy or friend. What mattered was one moment on the 20th of December, 1943, when a man chose humanity over orders. Their friendship lasted 18 years. Franz Stigler died in Vancouver on the 22nd of March, 2008, at the age of 92. 8 months later, on the 24th of November, 2008, Charlie Brown died in Miami at 86. They were buried far apart, yet their stories remain forever linked. Their journey later became a best-selling book that introduced millions to their story. But the true legacy is not fame or recognition. It is the lesson Stigler left behind. That even in war, humanity can survive. That even in enemy uniforms, people can still recognize one another as human beings. 47 years to find each other. 18 years side by side. Both gone within 8 months. As if neither could exist long without the other. This is not just a war story. It is a reminder of what it means to be human.